I remember in the 80s when I got my first credit card, my son's godmother said, "You will regret the day that you got that." She was so right. She was so right, and it didn't take me long to regret it because I knew nothing about money. Because again, the environmental system is set up for you to be a consumer. If they're giving you credit beyond your means, the goal is to get you into debt. So you got to remember, we live in a society that the goal is extracting the wealth of the people least equipped to use their money in that way. The first step in navigating the emotions is to know what they are, and to know what they are with a high degree of self-compassion. But in that moment, you were operating from the information that you had, the emotional stuff around money, all in that moment. So I don't want to leave that without people hearing that the first step is to recognize that it's present and to meet it with compassion rather than judgment. That's why I kind of kept stopping you when you would go to the place of, yeah, but I, right? Notice your compulsion to keep, but I, So that's judgment, and judging yourself harshly for the choices that you made with the best information that you had is abuse.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. You'll probably see big smiles on our faces if you're watching us on YouTube, because I have a very special guest today. I am going to tell you a little bit about this guest, but if you want a little auntie energy, I guess that's what she called it. I called it big sister energy. She's calling it auntie energy. It's like the wise energy, the wisdom, the older Black woman energy. That we're going to have all that today. So let me tell you a little bit about this amazing woman that I met at ICF Converge. So as many of you know, we had a table this year at ICF Converge Change Coaches, and right across from me was Saundra Davis, she's a financial coach, trainer, amongst many other things, really wise about money, people of color and money, wealth distribution, how it's changed throughout the years, economic injustice. And she does it in the most loving way. It's funny because when she came over to my table, and she's showing you her shirt. So please follow us on YouTube, watch it on YouTube. But what does it say? Economic justice is healing justice. Yes, healing is the big word there. But I saw her, and she's light skinned. So I was like, when I saw her, and everybody that's Black will understand this. And if you're not Black, that's okay. It's okay if you laugh. I'm giving you permission. Well, when I saw her, I didn't know. And when I heard her talk, because, light-skinned folks, they sneak up on you sometimes. And I heard her talk, and I got a talking. And I have another elder like that's light-skinned. And, she's actually older. She's like in her 80s. And so she actually had to pass. And you just learn so much from these folks. And so Saundra and I are going to have a conversation about money below the surface. And we're gonna hit on things like why money is hard for people of color. If you're someone who grew up poor, like me, why early traumas are hard, like how they contribute to money and systems. She's also going to talk about how we can redefine our financial wellness. So we're going to get into a lot of different topics here. But before we get into that, first off, what did I miss about your intro, Saundra? And then we're going to spend a little time having fun about generations here in a minute too.
First of all, I'm really glad to be with you. I felt an instant kinship. Of course, there's the Black thing, right? There's that moment where you check in to see, because all skin folk ain't kinfolk. So I was checking to see if you was skin folk or kinfolk. And once I realized you was kinfolk, I'm like, okay, we good, right? And yes, you can imagine that happens a lot. I've been asked if I'm everything from Italian to, I was even asked if I was Asian once, which was really shocking to me, but, because I don't see that when I look at me, but also I only see Black when I look at me. And I know that other people see something different, but for me, that's what I see. And so usually what I say, and I can't remember if I said it to you, was don't act like there ain't somebody in your family who looks like me. So there's
kind of my mom. I mean, my mom's lighter than me.
Yeah, always that. And my mom's darker than you.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm used to people not always recognizing. And I will say it's when I was younger, it used to feel very hurtful because I didn't feel seen by my own people, which was really challenging as a young person. Now, not as much. I mean, I've been through a lot of my own recognizing of internalized racism. So I understand what happens for us and the protection. And so, people will say, "Oh, were you from the South?" I'm like, "Look, I was raised by Big Mom." So what you hear is, I was born and raised in San Francisco. So the southernness that people hear is me being raised by somebody who was from Georgia. I think it's just my what do they call it? The African American vernacular that people are not always expecting when they see me and then they hear me. So that's like kind of the framework. So the first thing we talked about was just the age gap. And my lovely sister here tried to call me sister age. And I said, how many people are 15 years older than you and sisters, right? I mean, it happens because people get around and do interesting things. But most of the time, I am with someone who's in their 50s, late 40s, early 50s, is usually kind of this auntie relationship that happens. And that's primarily because the non-joking part of it is, number one, community is really crucial for the health and well-being of Black folks. And I believe all folks, and particularly Black folks, because that's how we survived generational enslavement. And so the connection for me, I'm always willing to be in whatever role people are comfortable with. And so I know there was a big thing some years back about some elders my age and even a little bit older not wanting to be referred to as auntie. I don't feel that way. I have no problem with my age. I'm very grateful to be 65. I know a lot of people that didn't get here. So whereas some people might still want to be, young, and still, want to be younger, I don't feel that. I'm very grateful to be where I am. And so the conversation that we were having was really about music. So my son is 46. And so my music era was, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? And then the 90s only by extension, because my son was, a young person in the 90s. And so SWV was one of my favorite groups.
Right here, be right here. Sorry, folks, I usually don't sing.
Exactly. Sang it.
I know them too. So yeah.
Yes. And so one of the things that I notice, well, one thing I will say, like when they say the music of 2000, I have no idea what they're talking about. Because by the time 2000 came around, I was still listening to what people were calling old school. Of course, it wasn't old school to me. It was my school. So Isley Brothers and all that other stuff. But I think the main thing is, one of the things that keeps me so connected in my work is my relationships with people who are 10 to 15 years younger than me. I learn just as much with them as I do, or y'all, as I do with my elders. So I have elders, and I do want, this is one thing I do want to say, is that when I was in my early 50s, one of my colleagues who became a friend, she's 10 years older than I am. She said I had these big dreams. I'm going to go out and I'm, expanding my coach training. I'm doing all of these things. And I had just completed an international cohort of coaches, financial coaches, Ghana and India. And I was just, I was going to blow it up, blow it up, blow it up. And I was about 52. And she said, I'm really scared for you. Because she said, oh, I thought she'd be excited, right? She said, oh. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, I'm scared for you. And this is somebody who's always rooting for me. So it wasn't any of that. I said, scared of what? My ego got a little, I kind of popped my collar a little bit. What you mean scared? Scared of what? And she said, you have no idea how much you're going to change between 55 and 65. And fortunately, I listened. I revisited all of my plans. Instead of building up, scaling up, I actually scaled back. And if I had not done that, I would now at 65 be trying to uh, scale back from this thing I had spent time, money, stress building, now trying to work my way out. Fortunately, I scaled back then when she said it. And so now I'm in a place where, um, I've got multiple things happening. I'm sure y'all will hear about that as we go, but there's nothing in my life I have to work my way out of. If I decided today to close up this condo and go move to Belize, I could do that.
Yeah, I love that. That's like kind of what one of the pieces of advice that you got is how much things change. 50 to 65 is different, or 55 to 65 is different from like 40 to 50 or, 50 to 60. And, I'm going to come back to something because you're testing me for kinfolk. And I'm thinking it must be the glasses and the Iowa accent, like talking the way I did. Look at this. You can admit it, or like, yeah,
No, it
this.
really, I hadn't heard you speak yet. It was more what, so my experience when I go places, I find, particularly to professional conferences where people of color are not the majority, right? So my experience is I see one of two things. I see people who really want to make sure that we click and connect and that we make sure we see all the Black folks or all the Latinos or all the Asians, right? I see that. Or I see people who really want to make sure that they blend in with the larger population. What, right? But I didn't know that, and seeing, I didn't know, right? And so I always, because what I found is that I connect more deeply with the folks who really want to make sure, like I make sure I say hi to every Black folks that I see everywhere all the time. That's how we were raised in the 60s and 70s. You didn't walk by somebody and not speak. You didn't walk by a Black person and not speak. And Dr. Joy DeGruy, she said this that really struck me. And I don't know that I knew that's what we were doing back then. Um, but she said, we used to say, the speaking was, I see you, in a world where you can go unseen, or disregarded. That acknowledgement was making sure, if nobody else sees you, I see you, you know, and, and then, she was talking about violence and young men, what you looking at, it's like my age group and, 60s, 70s growing up, you wouldn't have seen that kind of interchange in the same way you would later years, right? So for me, I'm always going to speak, and then it does what it does. I no longer get my feelings hurt when someone is not on that same wavelength, when someone is really committed to making sure that they don't stand out. There's a lot of folks when they go to these places, these huge conferences, they don't want to stand out. They want to feel part of the larger group. And I now at my age and stage, I understand that too. And there's room. And it's also, I'm very aware that I can fit in and blend in anywhere.
You're always discerning too. I think you actually attract those people. If someone's going to come over to you, they probably are kinfolk. But I do want to get into, I'm thinking about when I was a child, because you were talking about generations and music. And, I'm thinking about like the very humble beginnings I had in small town Iowa, my dad working in a meat packing plant, my mom working in the local factory. Nothing seemed amiss until my parents got divorced and we moved to Des Moines, Iowa. And then all of a sudden we were, Section 8 housing. My mom was using food stamps. And I was really, I think there was a lot of programming I got. And that programming was, wow, you are never going to have enough. So you always, or you're never going to be able to save. Or it was a very scarce mindset. Like it's just survival. That's all it's about, is survival. So I've had, I've worked on a lot of this, but a lot of us have had trauma with money. And what I will say is during that time, I was probably more of the New Edition type because I had a big sister. I still listen to them. Actually, I'm going to leave this in the notes, folks, if you're interested. There's a young woman, she's probably in her 30s, and she's listening to music for the first time from like the 90s. And do you know her?
I know. Yeah, there's her, and then there's two young men who do the same. Yeah, yeah.
So into Jodeci, like Devontae Spring. But anyways, folks, I don't, for those of you that know nothing what we're talking about, we're going to get into money. So maybe talk a little bit about how those views are formed. I know when I met you, you also talked about wealth transfer and how it's been taken away. And we're even seeing that right now in the United States. Like wealth is being transferred. People almost didn't get their SNAP benefits. So maybe talk a little bit about like trauma and how that impacts our relationship with money.
If it's okay with you, I'd like to start with the environmental aspect first, right? And primarily because what happens often is that people associate their financial circumstances with their value, right? And so we live in a society that minimizes the value of people who are experiencing poverty, even when, and especially when, the external environment creates the poverty. Think about it this way. If you think back to the television shows that you may have seen as a young person about the 40s and the 50s, right? Well after 1929 of the big market crash, right? But after the wars, and you would see, Donna Reed. She's a stay-at-home mom wearing her heels and her dress, got her hair did, and she's doing the housework. And her husband brings home the bacon, right? And then you see the 70s where there's the Angelique commercial about I can bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan and never let you forget you're a man, right? So we went from this one household, and now this was very seldom true in communities of color, but this notion that there's a stay-at-home mom, there's a father who's a provider, and everybody is able to make a living and be okay, right? And then we get into where most of us are living now, where in the Black community for sure. Now, granted, I'm not saying there were never any stay-at-home moms. I was fortunate to have two moms. One was a stay-at-home mom, but she took care of children, so she did have an income.
Wow, that's way before your time to have two moms. But anyways, I don't want to go off topic.
Well, yeah. But we can have that conversation another time. Yeah. So I had two moms and a dad. My point in saying this environmental piece is that we went from the expectation that there was one person that stayed home and took care of the children, and they made enough money from the one income to survive. A family could survive on one income. Now, different families look different ways, right? So I want to be clear. That's what society was showing us on television. Generally, that wasn't happening in Black families, brown families, Asian, right? We know that. But that was still the image that was being portrayed. When we're growing up and we're seeing one thing and we're experiencing something else, we're already growing up with being othered. How come my mama going out and her mama staying home? How come my mama's not at my games?
She's not picking me up from school. Yeah.
That's the first thing that I think people don't recognize, that if you're experiencing any level of lack, scarcity, or poverty layered on by the external environment of what you're seeing, it is bound to cause internal response. Sometimes that response is trauma. Now, the trauma isn't the thing in us. The trauma is the event, and it's our response to the event, right? And so we think about a trauma as being an event itself, when it's actually what is our response to an event. That's why you can have two people raised in the same household, and I say this all the time, two people raised in the same household who hear, we can't afford it, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. One of them may say, I'll never live like that again, and save every dime. And the other one say, I'll never live like that again, and spend every dime.
Yes.
Same circumstance, different response. And it's almost always, whenever I say this, most people do exactly what you just did with your face. Yes, I can relate to that, right?
Well, because like I'm a big Bears fan. Actually, this year is good because, well, I don't know. It remains to be seen. And by the time this is released, we'll have all the answers that we need. But football players, right? Like that's exactly describes some of them. Like some of them like play for 5 years and they take care of their bodies, and then they get an announcing career and they become an investor, right? And then others just buy cars and spend it all. And I think that's something you learn, right? When you are living in poverty, right? You don't learn. I don't think I learned how to manage. Like nobody taught me. I learned a little bit in business school, And then afterwards, but I didn't learn. Did you? I mean, it's really hard.
No, I learned nothing about money until I was 44 years old.
Oh,
So by the time I was 44, and I had made good money. It wasn't even that I hadn't made good money. I had at different times in my life. But at 22, I got out of the Navy, broke with a son. When I say lived in struggle, you have to remember, I mean, I'm sure all of you listening know there are degrees, right, of what poverty may look like for different people. So I was in the Navy. In the military, you get 3 hots and a cot. You know you're going to eat. You know you've got a place to live. That's all good. Once I had a son, and my mother, one of my mothers, was already my dependent. She literally was my dependent. Um, once I got pregnant, I had to move back home to the San Francisco Bay Area so that she could live with me. So now this small check that was fine when I was single living in the barracks, plenty money, right? Now there's 3 of us dependent on that income. Poverty, yes, there's the economic, there's the poverty guidelines that the United States here in this country that they have, but then there's also the actual experience of poverty. Can you go into the store and buy what your family needs without having, back in my early years, credit was not a big deal.
yeah, it's interesting when you told that story, credit card story, because I remember getting out of college. Um, I got a job at a staffing firm. It was a temp job, and it was paying me more than I ever made, but that wasn't much. And I went out and I bought a brand new car, and I was so mad at my boss. I was like, "Isn't she nosy?" But I went to work, and she's like, "Whose car is that?" I was like, "Mine." And she's like, "You don't know anything." And she was brown, and she was like, "What are you doing buying a new car?" She's like, "You barely are out of school." And I was like, "Who does she think she is?" And to this day, I was like, "Dang, she was right." And she was probably, she was a brown person that would consider herself a person of color, and was just like, I think she was from the hood, and she was just like, "What are you doing?" Like, and so, but I do love one of the things I want to move to, because like, I was mad. So folks, think about when that was told to you. Were you mad? I was mad when people told me about credit cards, and, because I had a bunch of debt like several years ago. This was like when I got out of business school, I had a lot of debt, and I ended up paying it off. So you can pay it off. I'm not saying advocating for it, because when you don't have it, you make a lot more money, right? Just in your sleep.
Well, the money you make, you keep.
Right, right. Let's talk about, I love what you said. We're meant to be consumers. I also have a lot of folks in my community that are, they're immigrants, and immigrants are expected to support families. So are Black people. Like a lot of us, like you, expected support. When we get a job, that's not our check. And so for those of you that didn't grow up that way, you are very privileged. And I don't mean that in a way that you should be ashamed. But when I got my first job at Walgreens, a lot of that was going to my family. So maybe talk a little bit about what about this world, how we're supposed to be consumers, and how do we break out of that without feeling guilty?
Well, so there's 2 things. The first thing that I want to say is that it is not abnormal for people who are raised with a sense of community. Like, I am not responsible for my community, but I'm responsible to my community. So, like you, when I made money, my money was shared with my family. Now, today, young people are calling that the black tax, not the black tax. I want to be real clear. It really breaks my heart to hear young Black folks say that when those of us who make it, right, get the job, go to college, whatever, are expected to offer some family support. um, collapsing that with the black tax, primarily because, number one, other communities do that as well. And I'm not saying that to diminish it. I'm saying it because that's how we survived, right? That's how we survived. And the black tax is actually what was done to us, not what something that we do to each other. So that I'll leave that there. You know, Sean Rochester wrote a book called The Black Tax that more adequately describes what that is. So the first thing to know is that in general, people who have less pay more. And we know that that's counterintuitive, but it's true. Think about it. If you go into a bank and you have $10,000 to open a banking account, right? You will not pay fees on that account. If you go into a bank and you have $500 to open a bank account, you will pay fees on that account, right? So when we think about just the scope of that, I understand why, right? The person who walks in with the 10,000, they can right away turn around and loan that money out. So they're making money off of those of us who have to pay the fees, right? They're making money through debt. So we just have to understand where we sit in the ecosystem of finance. And you don't have to have a finance degree to understand that. You can just understand that when we are consumers first, and notice that I'm saying the difference between consumers and customers, that we used to be customers where they would serve us and they cared about us, and we could go into a store and we knew the person that we were buying from, and they weren't trying to gouge us, right? They expected, we were looking for the lowest price and they were looking to maximize their profits. And we knew that was the relationship that we had between customers and sellers, right? So now the consumer is not connected to the seller, right? Not in the same way that it used to be. Now most of our purchases are done online now, or in a major retailer. And so our society as a whole, particularly here in the US, I can't say as much about other places because in the places that I travel, I don't see it in the same way. I still see more community money transfers, but we are designed to consume. Think about fast food, fast clothes. I remodeled my home last year. The home that I live in is a condo that I bought 25 years ago. It was already 10 years old or so when I bought it. The original appliances that were in when they built it were here when I bought it. And they were still working last year when I removed them and bought new appliances. Those old 30-year-old appliances were working better than the brand new ones that I have now. We have to recognize that it is a very deliberate thing for us to change appliances, for us to have fast clothes where we buy it, wear it a couple of times, it falls apart, or we're bored with it for the next trend. And so the whole society is geared toward us spending. And people who have wealth have more capacity to spend, right? And they also don't spend in the same way. You might have read the book The Millionaire Next Door, right? He's driving an old car, wearing regular, not wearing the judgment signals, the Jordans, and all of those other things. And so the reason that I bring this up is that people think there's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? Why am I in debt? You're part of a system that is designed to extract wealth. There's a very specific way that we are researched as people to help those who are marketing to us know what our biases are, right? So for you, I would imagine if you tap back into the car, what was happening for you when you decided to buy the car early in your first job?
I hated the car I had, and I wanted, both cars I had in high school were purchased by my mom, and so they were buckets, as we used to call them. And so I wanted a reliable car that I could drive, but I didn't know.
Don't go there yet. Stay with what was happening for you. You wanted something reliable. What else?
Yeah, I didn't want any stress when I was driving. Um, I I wanted to feel nice. I wanted something that felt nice because everything else was just up to that point. It was, again, it was not nice. And, I would have to do a lot of repairs. And so, yeah, I did want something that looked nice. Yeah.
You wanted safety, you wanted reliability, you wanted something that was appealing to you. And it sounds like you also wanted something that made you feel differently than driving the buckets, right?
Yeah.
So the choice that you made makes perfect sense in that place. Now, does it make the best financial sense? Maybe not. But every financial decision that you ever make makes perfect sense when you understand what you believe about money.
Hmm. So what did I believe about money? What do you think? Was there a lack of belief?
Well, so that's what we're looking at, right? So you tell me, what were you when you think about that first job? If I understood correctly, it was post college, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you went from what how you experienced a stable financial life, then your family changed, and then it was less stable. Things were different. You were receiving support that I suspect was attached to some shame, right? And then you manage to get to college. You're in college, there's debt, and you get out and you get a job. And now there's more money than you've ever made before. So put yourself there for a moment, thinking about all of that. What did you believe about money in that moment?
That I could borrow it and just pay it back. Like that I could go into debt to buy things. Like I went into debt for college. Like I would get, the student loans. Like I had a lot of scholarships, and so I would also get student loans for housing, and I would get those refunds, and I'm like, "Oh, this is all going to work out." And but I wasn't thinking about,
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that.
okay. Yeah.
So your perspective was, yes, there was lack. And now, if I do this, I can do this. I can go to college. I can use debt. I can succeed. I can get a job. I can pay it back. And so your perspective was, it sounds like, and rescue me if I'm wrong, things will get better. And as things get better, I'll be able to pay back the debt that I've created.
Yeah, that's right. Like I'll get raises, I'm mortgaging my future. I have a degree. I'm going to make more money. This is just a temporary job, and I'm going to get like a college job. But that job ended up being a nonprofit that paid me nothing.
Yeah. So let's not do that. Yeah. So let's not do that.
Yeah.
So, but the reason that I keep stopping you there is because that's when we go into this polarity. Because it's easy for you to look back and say, yeah, but in the moment at the time you got through college, yes, you had debt, you survived it, so when people say, I didn't know anything about money, you knew enough about money to get through college, navigate your living with limited information. You didn't have information, and you still made all of these successful moves. And so when it turns out that those moves turn out to not be as great as we might have thought, we forget that it wasn't that we didn't have good thinking. We didn't have full information. So had you had more information, had you had an opportunity to meet with somebody who said, yes, you can get a reliable car and minimize your debt, right? There were ways that you could do this, and actually supported you in doing that, rather than, and I understand, what the sister was saying, you don't know anything. Well, that's not really helpful, but unfortunately, that's what people do. That's what financial professionals do, even today. Judge people's decisions without understanding their perspective in the circumstance. So when I hear your perspective in the circumstance, I hear, I want to be safe. Yes, I want to look nice. I want the car to look nice. I want something that I'm happy in. I suspect college was some years of financial distress. On the heels of years of financial distress, I can imagine that you wanted some breathing room, and that the car probably represented that.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was in college, I didn't really feel it because it was borrowed money. And I did, you don't pay your student loans back until, and I hadn't started, but you don't pay it back until, sometimes 6 months to a year, if you want to defer more. I don't know what this is like now, but what I'd love to hear, because I know we could be on this pod all day. I'd love to hear, like, psychologically, like, when thinking about what I believed about money or what I knew about money, how do you start to change that view? Because it's like now there's been a lot of work that I had to do about guilt, like feeling guilty because I came from, remembering where I came from. But I think about because I read The Psychology of Money.
Can I ask you to pause for a moment?
Yeah.
What is the guilt? What is the guilt? Say more about the guilt.
That's a good question. I think that there's a lot of folks, there's probably a name for this, but I think there's a lot of us that come from, like Black people, especially, that come from poor backgrounds. And we don't want to be considered bougie, exploiting our people. That's the guilt.
So guilt rather than shame, though. That's kind of what I'm trying to unpack.
Yeah, I think mine would be guilt. Like, I guess reconciling that with my ancestors made it so I could have an easier time, but then I have to give back. So I don't know.
Right. Okay. So this is what I would say. The first step is really understanding what you believe about money. And this is why projects just about every training that I do, I use the Money Habitudes deck. And habitudes is a combination of your habits and your attitudes, right? Your beliefs about money, and then what you do about money. And so it's a card deck. It's a self-assessment that you can do to learn about what your habitudes are. There are a lot of assessments about money out there. This is one of the ones that I appreciate because it's judgment free. There's no such thing as a bad habitude. There's a lot of thoughts about money, and I understand, I hear you've read Morgan's book, The Psychology of Money. Everybody's journey is different. It truly is just like every other aspect of your life. You and I could have the exact same goals, the exact same income, the exact same expenses, and our financial plan could look drastically different. Everybody is different. And so the first thing I would say, and this is the reason that I believe that financial coaching is distinguished from life coaching, because it's more than mindset. It's mindset plus the technical aspects. It's one thing for me to, and like even you described, been working on the mindset piece for a long time and still grappling with it. And one of the hardest parts for me being at Converge was that most people were really kind of afraid of this conversation. And I would contend, and I said in the group with the other master coaches, that every coaching conversation is a financial coaching conversation, even if we don't call it that, because money touches every aspect. So what I'm hearing from you is there's this polarity of, yes, I'm working. I want to have nice things. I want to be able to do what I want with my money and live the way that I want with my money. And I sometimes feel guilt because there are other people similarly situated to me who don't have the privilege or the options that I have. And the people before me didn't have access in the way that I have access. And I would contend all of those things can be true. And then the question becomes, and we'll unpack this as we go, but do you think your ancestors wanted better for you than they had for themselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my grandma lived to 93, and I was able to be with her and, like, just see, like, how far, my great grandmother was a slave, and I was the second one that got a college degree.
So, but before we move, I want to make sure that we answered that question, right?
Oh, wow. I think that's great because, like, one of the things I try to do is go back and talk to my traumatized self. Like, when I think about how money has evolved for me now at the age I'm at, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this forever. Like at the scale and speed that I do it. I mean, to my community, I know some of you are like, do you ever rest? I do. I just love the work I do, but I also know I'm going to be up in Belize with you, Saundra, but for real. But I do think, like, as you get older, other things become equally as important. And one of those things has been, oh, I think I want to buy a building and rent it out and, like, live in it, but also build a gym and also have a garden and, like,
Well, so, and here's the thing, you can do both of those things. This is why financial planning is so crucial, right? Because so I knew nothing about money. Well, I won't say that. I was not behaving with money in the way that was best for me until I was in my 40s. I got my master's degree in financial planning at 44, right? I went back to school at 44 because I knew I wasn't going to have enough to retire. And I knew that I'd have to work well into my 70s. I believed I'd have to work well into my 70s. And so I knew that I needed to get a job that I could do as long as my brain held up. And so my partner was a stock trader, and he said, become a financial planner. I literally had never heard those words. I never knew financial planner was even a job. So I went to a bookstore back when you could walk into a bookstore, and there was a book. An author said, if you're going to hire a financial planner, hire a CFP, or better yet, someone with a master's degree in financial planning. So I got a master's degree in financial planning. I took out $40,000 in student loan debt at 44. I lived off of that money while I got the master's. I still today, fast forward 20 years, right? Because, COVID and all the other reasons, um, still has student loan debt. Had I not done that, I would not be sitting here with you. I would not have trained more than 2,000 people around the globe. I would have not given so much. I don't say given back, given so much in my community, right? So you get to think about money in service of your goals.
mm, I love that. See, you got to say that one again too.
You can think about money in service of your goals because you're not exploiting anyone unless you are. And with what I know about you, that's kind of not your jam. So I would contend that that's probably not something to spend a lot of energy on. Right? Now, you have to do with that what you do in your soul and in your brain and all that. But I would contend that I suspect there's not anyone who knows you that would view you as extractive. I view you as putting into community. So maybe there are some things, some stories that you tell yourself that you can give yourself a different story. So when you think about the plan of buying a building where you have a place to live and it's an opportunity for other people, what is the story? And you don't have to do it now, as I know that we're tight on time, but these are super important topics because number one, they're real. Financial information is easy. The emotional aspect of it is the most challenging. So that's why I keep asking you to pause for us to navigate that, because that's the rub. Any book will give you a budget. Any book will give you a debt reduction plan. That's easy. That's the easy stuff. That's the easy stuff. The harder stuff is, what do I believe about money? What do I believe about myself in relationship to money? What do I believe money gives me? And what is the cost, the true cost? Like, I use this example all the time. I used to work with a bunch of, mostly with teachers. I would do a lot of teaching for teachers. And, they would always come in with, oh, I know that I should stop going to Starbucks. I really, I am already struggling. I know I shouldn't do that. I know I should make the coffee at home. I've got everything that I need to make it at home. But when I go into the coffee shop, I walk in and nobody's asking me for anything but my coffee order. Yeah, they write my name, spell my name wrong on the cup, but the only time I hear my name is when they say, your coffee's ready. My kindergartners aren't pulling at me. My husband isn't asking me for anything. My own kids aren't asking me for anything. And then I sit in the chairs and they're yucky because people spill stuff down the side of them. But for that moment, It's me and my coffee. And then she said, but I should stop, right? And I said, absolutely not. What was she buying? What was that teacher buying?
I'm not sure.
Think about it. What did she say? What was she buying?
Something big, maybe?
When she walked into that coffee shop, what was she getting? Think about what I said. My kids aren't asking for anything. My school children aren't asking for me. The only time someone's calling my name is to tell me my coffee's ready. What is she really buying?
Attention, connection,
Connection. What else? Peace.
community.
Someone doing something for her instead of the other way around. So what we get to do with any purchase we make, what are we really buying? When we hear someone say, I bought a $3,000 purse, we can judge it, or we can say, what does it mean for you to have that? Because people are buying something beyond the thing we see.
Huh. Yeah, I love the emotional piece of it because I think about family members that like really like sneakers or things and this makes them feel good. And it's like, so maybe to land this, like, what are some resources that you would recommend? Because I know you know a lot of things, like any books, like that you would recommend that where people could just get started. Because like, folks, I know this is a little longer than usual. It's just this is a deep topic, and as you see, Saundra does it on a whole different level. So maybe we could leave folks with just a few resources, and even your resources. Like, how can they find you too? Because I went to one of your workshops and it was great.
Yeah, so we often have workshops. Our website is sagefinancialsolutions.org. We are a nonprofit organization. We offer mostly train the trainer stuff, but we do occasionally have professional development for people who are in any field and don't want to be a financial coach, but want to learn more about financial topics. So people can go to our website. The Money Habitudes is also a really good start because it's a very gentle and kind way to navigate the emotions around money and what we think. And knowing that those change. When I first started out, I was all one way and now I'm very different. And that's because I've learned how to be different. And I think what people can start with, where I would like to see people start, if there's any unkind language in how you speak to yourself about money. Oh, I'm bad with money. I don't know about money. I don't know what I'm doing. Those kinds of things are not something that I can just say, oh, don't do that. That's not how it works, right? We'd be battling our own brain, right? Our brains judge. That's what they do. And so what we can do is bring a gentler place. First, recognizing that we're being harsh with ourselves. And quite frankly, judging yourself harshly about money choices doesn't help. It often does more harm than good. There are many, many places that offer free financial coaching. I'll send you an email with some of those that you can put in the show notes. Then there are also sliding scale coaches that you can work with if you do have money. And, sometimes people have money and still have behaviors that are not satisfying for them. So there's all kinds of ways to get the help. The main thing I would say, start with kindness and then build on the information. Right? It is much more challenging to change the emotion and the psychology of money than it is the knowledge. The knowledge is the easy part.
Yeah, I love that. Psychology, emotions. And the coffee shop story, folks. Yeah, you're buying something else. You're not even buying that pair of shoes, or you're not even buying that expensive meal. You're buying, you want to feel better. So thank you so much for joining us, my friend and elder, or auntie, I guess I should call you.
All of that.
And folks, if you're not following us on YouTube, please do. You're going to get a lot more out of these podcasts. And thanks a lot. And we'll see you next time.